And the sound's working really well. Good. All right. Hi, everybody. It's Alex Grichuhin with the Home Rehab Network and Denali Health and Mind You Lungs, as well as. Anyways, I'm just one of the clinicians here at, of course, Home Rehab Network, where we do the pulmonary and cardiac rehabilitation, of course, now called telerehabilitation. For those that don't know, what is telerehabilitation? So telerehab is, so HRN, so this company here, HRN was the first company in the world to develop telerehabilitation that provided pulmonary and cardiac rehabilitation. So that's what HRN is. It's the Home Rehab Network, HRN. You know, when the company first started out, people thought HRN was a home improvement company because it's home rehab. They don't realize that people just rehabilitate from their own home. Good morning. People just rehabilitate from their own home. We use like things through Zoom and stuff like that. Also, there's something I need to bring up here. I mentioned on a smoking cessation, just like tips and tricks with smoking cessation. And there was a comment saying that I don't agree with your recommendation. So this is not my recommendation. So I'm a clinician that goes over facts. These are protocols set in place long before I even started anything. So I'm talking about, you know, things that you can find out from, you know, this is the 1 minute asthma to things on the American Lung Association, things that are on COPD Foundation and even Emphysema Foundation of America. And so these are organizations. And what works best, especially with over here, there's 10 major techniques when we look at, you know, there are 10 major techniques to help somebody wean off of cigarettes or nicotine. All right. The person commented that they did cold turkey, which for some people it works really well, for some people it doesn't. That's why there's a variety of techniques. You don't have to agree to anything, but just understand that I don't just make stuff up. So, you know, when that person commented, I was a little confused because it was like, you know, these are tactics that we use here that works very well with people that smoke for a very long period of time. So, hi, Kathy. So anything I bring up, just remind you that there's, you know, we have to base everything off of facts. We have to base things off of proven results. You know, nothing we can just make up. So I don't make anything up. These are based off of facts, everything I bring up. So anyways, HRN is, of course, a telerehabilitation company that provides pulmonary and cardiac rehab. It's so successful with rehabilitating somebody. It's so successful that a lot of the doctors and hospitals throughout the United States are highly recommending this program for their patients, that they're trying to get their patients into this program as quickly as possible because the program, first off, is, you know, it's covered by insurance. It does one heck of a job when it comes to the, you know, person not being able to do a lot to being able to do more. But, oh, good morning, Deborah, Kathy, and Laurie. Good morning, everybody. So when we look at rehab, we look at consistency. You know, people have to maintain a certain consistency. So we look at consistency. We look at how some of the therapy techniques work on some people while some probably don't work as well for some others. What I'm trying to say is that you can't just make one program out for 100,000 people and expect the same results. Everybody's disease is different. You know, you have two people with emphysema. Their symptoms and how they feel every day are not identical. Even though they're the same diagnosis, their symptoms are different. So we have to always strategize. We have to be strategic, you know, on any approach we do as far as care plans and how we approach with somebody, you know, that has different types of complications. So when we look at the lungs or we look at the heart for rehabilitation, we're looking for consistency, okay? Meaning that 1 minute of therapy is probably not going to be therapeutic, right? Of course not. If I go into a gym for 1 minute, I probably won't get a lot out of it at all, Okay, so how much timing is needed for rehabilitation? Well, we try 30 minutes first. Okay, we try 30 minutes of therapy first. We saw that 30 minutes didn't improve a lot because why? There wasn't enough time spent with the patient to rehabilitate that person. So 30 minutes didn't work. So we had to get rid of 30 minutes, which technically I don't think we ever did 30 minutes. But just in general, because I used to be a director for advanced lung and heart, I was a director of pulmonary rehab at a skilled nursing and rehab center. But you know, some of the therapists that came into that program to work on patients, they didn't spend a lot of time with these people. So they were just giving medications and they just go to the next. And then give medications, go to the next. Give medications, go to the next. I was like, what type of therapy is that? That's not preventative. That's not prophylactic. That's why a lot of people found me to be a very hard boss to deal with, because if I have a therapist that's spending 1 or 2 minutes with when somebody needs a lot of help, I'm going to get rid of that person. I'm not going to have that person work on that patient. That patient needs more help than just a flyby. Okay, so like people go into a hospital, they probably don't get a lot of education in the hospital. Okay, not saying every single hospital is identical. So one person probably have gotten some education, but most likely in a hospital, you're not going to get educated for like lung disease, heart disease for about an hour and a half. They won't do that. Okay, in our pulmonary rehab, you know, 30 minutes, of course, would never work. I would never allow a therapist to work on a patient for 30 minutes. It just, there's not enough timing. There's not enough time. I mean, just explaining some techniques probably take a little bit longer, you know? So we want to be realistic. 30 minutes won't work. So then we looked at 40 minutes. 40 minutes was just pretty much the same thing as 30 minutes to me. It just wasn't enough time. You know, we're trying to educate, we're trying to, so not just to educate, we're trying to show people, we go over about 1,700. Did you want that number? 1,700 different exercises and techniques. From everything combined, 1,700 different topics. So that's a lot. I mean, that's not like 1 or 2 things. You know, somebody learns pursed lip breathing, that's one technique. You know, and like, let's say somebody went to a pulmonary rehab and they said, oh, I know how to pursed lip breathe. Well, that's great, but that's one technique. We show you all sorts of techniques. We show you how to breathe and walk, all that stuff. But besides the education, we have to exercise with you, right, in our pulmonary rehab. So 40 minutes or 30 minutes will probably be enough to educate somebody, but it's not realistic to do an exercise for, let's say, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, when the whole timing of the whole class would be 30 minutes. So we don't do 30 minutes. We don't do 40 minutes. What works best here is the Medicare kind of gave us an option. They're like, you know, you guys can do the 30 minutes, or you can do the hour and a half, you know, 90 minutes. So we stuck with the hour and a half. One and a half hours we spend every other day with a patient, okay? In a group setting, of course, but we work with that person. You know, we educate that person. That gives us enough time to educate and exercise the same day, all right? The timing, of course, is everything with anybody, but you get a lot of people that they want to keep waiting. And they want to keep waiting longer. They keep procrastinating. They're like, oh, I got all these things, all this stuff. What would happen? I mean, I always think two of the worst deaths is suffocation, that includes drowning, and being burnt alive. You're talking about waiting when your lungs are getting worse and worse on a progressive disease. And you're waiting to the last minute and hoping, praying that this will be resolved. You know, people that wait till the last minute to join into a pulmonary rehab, when they end up with the worst case scenario basis where death is like knocking on that person's door. Why would anybody wait to that point? Why would you seek help when you have no other option? I understand, because there's no other options available, but why would you wait that long to get help? You know, to go into a pulmonary rehab, people wait till the last minute until they're near dead to join a pulmonary rehab program. You know, I have a real problem. First thing in the morning, I feel really short of breath when I first wake up, and it takes me a little while to get out of it. Any tips on what can really help with that? Yes, Michelle, I'll bring that up in a second, but I want to go over the hours spent, you know, the timing spent in therapy. But yeah, I'll be happy to answer that question. Timing is everything. 1 or 2 minutes of therapy will never be therapeutic whether you like it or not. It's just not going to happen. You know, you spend 1 or 2 minutes, there's always a million reasons not to do something. There will always be a million reasons, you know. But when somebody waits till they're near death, you're looking at worst case scenario action. I get a lot of people like that. But I'm always like, why did that person wait that long? You know, and everyone's like, oh, you're a miracle worker, you know, oh my goodness, you cured me type of thing. I was like, first off, I don't cure anybody. You know, I fix the problem, sure, but I don't cure anybody, okay? But just because I can get somebody's lung functions back up and they're walking a lot further doesn't mean I'm curing them. I'm just getting them to do, you know, because I don't know why people think I cure. I don't cure anybody. I don't cure COPD because COPD is not curable yet, okay, yet. We are working on that. But what raises an eyebrow, what it raises the eyebrow is, how in the world can I get somebody from end stage back up to normal? I mean, isn't that the cure? Isn't that a cure? The thing is that I can't guarantee it. See, I can get somebody's lung functions up. I can say, yes, you know, if you do the work, I can easily get your lung functions up. That's realistic. That's fine. But getting somebody from end stage back up to normal, okay, I can't guarantee that for everybody. You know, it's how much work you put into it. That's why I'm bringing up timing. How much work, like if you go into a gym, how much timing do you need on your bike for cardio exercises? Does anybody know? How much timing you need? You need to go past 12 minutes. If you can get to 20 minutes, you know, 15, 20, 30 minutes, that's great for cardiovascular. But if you're only pushing yourself to, you know, working out only when you want to and not on a designated plan, like on a calendar or something, like if you were going to set up your own therapy schedule, you know, for yourself, you would write on a calendar and set a plan up, and you stick to that plan. Plan would be 3 days a week, and then, you know, 3 days a week 1 week, and then 4 days a week the next week, and go back to 3 days a week, spending a half hour to 45 minutes per day, you know, on exercise. That's the way it should be, right? We should be exercising, but when somebody spends only 1 or 2 minutes or 5 minutes of therapy, it's not going to be therapeutic. They probably won't get a lot out of that. So spending time with yourself on your exercise is incredibly important. Longevity is very, very, very important. You know, we want to, you know, if you pick out an activity, and let's say you want to see, okay, I want to find out which activity is best suited for me. First, you want to look at the affordability. Whatever it is, let's say walking, is it affordable? Can you do it? Do you have to do it in front of anybody else? Can you do it by yourself? Is it affordable? Is it easy to do? You know, if you're rating high on those, like let's say you pick biking. Is it affordable? Can you do it in your home? Can you do it in bad weather? Is it something you enjoy doing? You know, and you just rate it from 10 being the best, 0 being the worst. If any of the activities, let's say you wrote down jogging, walking, biking, okay? And I understand that some people in here probably can't even do any of those yet, okay? But I'm talking about which exercise would you choose for longevity reasons, for like looking at 6 months into the future, right? Which exercise would work best? Well, it has to be affordable because you don't want to keep spending money, you know? So Walking, very inexpensive to do. Very inexpensive. Biking, well, bicycling might be a little expensive, maybe. I mean, you have to purchase the bike, and then you have to drive to a certain location if you want to do mountain, so that could be expensive. Indoor, stationary bike, not as expensive as you think. You just have to purchase the bike. Even the hand and foot pedal thing works. So, you pick different category, like different types of exercises, and you just rate it on, is this something that I can do when I'm 90? Is this something that I can do that won't hurt my wallet? If anything that you're choosing that is enjoyable, it has great for longevity, it's very affordable, you can easily afford it. If not, it's already free. If any of those actually hit really high, that's the one you want to stick with. So let's say it was biking, let's say it was walking. Okay, can you do that when you're 90? Sure you can. Is it expensive to walk? No, you just have to put one foot in front of the other, right? So, but when you're picking an exercise, and sometimes you have to do an exercise that you don't like. There are some times you have to do an exercise which you'll hate. It's like, I hate that one. Some people hate abdominals, like working their abdominals. Some people hate working out their legs. They rather work out their arms. So when we look at some of the exercises, we're looking for longevity, affordability, of course, but 1 or 2 minutes of therapy will never be therapeutic. You're doing respiratory muscle training, mountain climbers. So let's say you're doing respiratory muscle training. I see this in therapy. People are used a delta V, but they'll use it for like about 5 minutes per day when it requires 6 times a day, 10 minutes each. That's on peer review. We saw that being the good threshold where we see the best outcomes coming from that patient. The person who is working out 6 times a day, 10 minutes each on their respiratory muscle trainer gets much more improvement than somebody who's only doing 5 minutes a day, And so for proper therapy, it's best to work out, or at least be in therapy for an hour and a half. That's what we work out with, is hour and a half. So let me go over some of these questions now. I have a real problem first thing in the morning. I feel very short of breath when I first wake up, and it takes me a little while to come out of it. Any tips on what will help with that? So there's a couple things I need to know about first. He says, I have a real problem first thing in the morning. I feel really short of breath. So one thing I want to ask is, and some people don't know, some people don't know they have sleep apnea. Some people don't know that you have a higher CO2, very little bit, you have a higher CO2 when you sleep. So let's say you wake up and you're feeling short of breath. The body relies on the muscles it has to work out with. So let's say the respiratory muscles are very weak. Well, and you're going to sleep, and let's say those respiratory muscles for breathing, isn't strong enough. Okay, so throughout the night, I probably wake up 1 or 2 or 3 times throughout the night because the body doesn't want to die. So it'll just constantly wake up. Your body wakes up 2, 3, 4, 5 times. You might want to get a sleep study. You want to double check to see if it is something with obstruction. Is it because my respiratory muscles are very weak and I need an external, a non-invasive ventilator? It's like a BiPAP, CPAP. I might need something like that, because those muscles are very weak. So what I'm trying to say is that if somebody wakes up short of breath, if anytime so you're short of breath, you just wake up and you're huffing and puffing and it takes a little bit to get out of, that means CO2 is a little bit higher in your system chronically. That's what that tells to me. That's what, when I read that, Michelle, when I read that, that's the first thing that comes to my head, is something is causing obstruction. Okay? Now, people don't know they have an obstruction. You can't monitor your snoring at night unless you kind of record it, but I mean, you don't know if you have an obstruction. What really tells is a study, so you would do a sleep study. Now, if the body relies on the muscle that it has to keep itself alive and keep it ventilating. Because if the muscles are very weak, you might be breathing shallow during your sleep, not getting rid of enough CO2. And the reason why you wake up feeling very short of breath is because of the CO2 was a little bit high when you woke up. So how can you fix that problem? Let's talk about the fix. How can you fix that problem? What's the best way to fix that? Of course, that's why you're asking me. But like, what's the best way to fix that problem? Well, if it's a muscle issue, then you need to do respiratory muscle growth, right? For a temporary solution, I would go and talk to my this is what I would do, is I would talk to my pulmonologist saying that in the middle of the night, I am not sleeping very well. I would, any recommendations, probably a sleep study or something, any recommendations you would give, doc? And I would ask my doctor, can you do a sleep study just to rule things out, just to see? And they have to show evidence. They don't just make things up. They have to show evidence that, 2 hours into your sleep, you started snoring and you had an obstructive, you had an AHI, it's a apnea-hypopnea index. So let's say that was really high. That's because the person is in the middle of the night, almost showing like Cheyne-Stokes breathing, which is a very bad breathing type. I would check with my doctor first. Then I would start working on respiratory muscle training. Because once you're on a CPAP or a BiPAP, you can come off of it if you improve those muscles, because the body relies on the muscle strength it has. So if it's weak, it's just going to utilize weak muscles, and it'd probably be bad performance all the way around. Okay, so I would do respiratory muscle training first, as I'm talking to my doctor about a sleep study. But I definitely go with the doctor on this one. Okay. That's one of the best suggestions I can give. January 1st, California is getting PPO. Yay! Already enrolled. Perfect, Kathy. If anybody has any questions, anything that you want to shoot out, did we get oh, here's a list. Okay. So I'm going to read out some questions on this. See, I'm in the program, started in November. Not really sure if it is shortness of breath or anxiety. Michelle, you have your clinician's phone number, okay? You contact your clinician, your assigned clinician. If somebody's in the program, each patient has an assigned clinician, a respiratory therapist, if you will, that is your go-to person anytime you have questions. You can also bring it up in class too, and they would love to bring, because it could be somebody else with that same issue, so it's always good to bring up those in class. Bring that up in class. Bring that up in class is another thing. But breathing or anxiety, I can do a breathing treatment and feel better. Breathing treatment, everyone likes to go with the easiest way out. Like, let me take a breathing treatment. Let me eat this. I don't want to work out because I hate working out. You have to sit up straight and you gotta deal with it. You gotta get into the rhythm of things. Start working out, doing the respiratory muscle training, doing walking and breathing. As you're seeing that, you're seeing evidence that you're improving. That's what people do. They see the evidence that they're improving and they keep going further and further and further and more and more and more. Okay, no problem. So love the program with Melanie and hope for the first time in a year. Hope, Lenny, there's no such thing as hope. It's either we do it or we don't. But I'm glad you're loving the program, you're doing well. I'm really glad about that. After I wake up, I am grateful I took what I learned from you and inhaled deeply, expanding my stomach. You're very welcome, Ruth. No problem at all. That's what we're here. That's what we're here for, guys. All right. So let me go over some of these questions. And by the way, if you have any questions you want to lay out, I'll be happy to answer them. I mean, I am a licensed clinician. I'm under the Maryland Board of Physicians, but any suggestions, anything like that, if it's something I don't know, I can't give you a false answer. I'm going to say you might want to talk to your doctor about that. But anything I can answer, but I'm not going to give, unless you're my patient, I'm not going to give some type of recommendation that could be potentially bad if you do it by yourself. There are some, like air stacking and things like that, could be really bad for somebody. So, but yeah. Anyways, All right, first question. Let's see. Am I close to the end of my life with COPD that is already requiring me to be on oxygen? Let me read that again. Am I close to the end of my life with COPD that is already requiring me to be on oxygen? You know, it's a good question. It's a good question. But it's a good question. So, is somebody close to the end of their life if they required oxygen? No, no. There are people that live 100 years and they're on supplemental oxygen. Doesn't mean you're going to die, you know. But when you're on oxygen, you need supplemental oxygen. That means oxygen's having a hard time getting into that blood. The oxygen's just having a tough time getting in there. You know, it's just difficult. You know what I would like to do is actually kind of show you some of that. If you guys don't mind, if you're not going to be grossed out with blood, I have a electrical, it's a digital microscope. And I can easily pull blood out. I can do it all myself. And you can see how the blood works a little bit, but seeing it up close on through here. You know, it's digital, so I can just, it's just like using another camera. So I can easily do that. If you guys want something like that, I can do that for next time. I need a little more prepping, but I can easily do that if you want to look at blood a little more closer. Like look at the dissociation curve, why temperature, pressures, and time is how oxygen gets from out of the blood into the tissue so the tissue can absorb it. So you can see all sorts how blood looks. It looks pretty cool. Anyways, so no, you can be on supplemental oxygen, but if you're requiring oxygen, then you know things are starting to get worse. Okay, they're getting worse, and probably waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting will just lead to end of life. You know, because it's a progressive disease. See, in this program, when we do pulmonary and cardiac rehabilitation, you know, you have people that were supposed to die. Like you have some people in here. You have some people that are supposed to die in a week. And they're still living like 3-4 years later, literally, okay? And why is that? Because they were constantly improving. They weren't getting worse. You know, it'd be different if all the work they did, they didn't improve at all. Well, if you're not improving, but you're not getting worse, what are you doing? You're staying the same. If you're getting worse and you're not improving, that's different. But let's say you work really, really hard inside the program, you didn't get any improvement. First off, we're at 98.8% successful. So regardless, you're going to get better, you know, because we're at a very high percentage. But it's different when you're trying your hardest to do something. If you're improving, how can you be getting worse? If you're improving yourself, look, there's no third direction. People look at hope, they look at this, they look at that. But if you're improving on a progressive disease, how are you getting it worse? So you won't die like that. You might die of old age. Well, old age doesn't really kill you. It's something that causes, you know, like when you get old, heart attack. So old age is not a disease. You know, it's just like being out of breath. Being out of breath is not a disease. It's nothing abnormal. People think, oh no, like I'm out of breath, there's something wrong with me. No, that's not the case at all. You know, people get short-winded when they work out. Now, if you're sitting still out of breath and you're not doing anything, that's a problem. But if you're working out, shouldn't you be a little winded? Yeah, of course. I've never seen an animal or an athlete, and I know a lot of athletes, professional athletes, celebrity athletes. I know a lot of them. They have my number anytime, you know, because they communicate with me, they chat with me. All right, I have from fighters to a lot of fighters, a lot of UFC fighters. I know a lot. I worked with a lot of people like that. And these were people that thought they were going to die. They're still living today. A lot of them went back to fighting, you know, when they were retired. And it's just amazing what can happen. But you're taking a progressive disease that's supposed to get worse. But if you're improving, how are you getting worse? You're not getting worse, okay? And the best thing about it is you're not staying the same either. Okay. See, after waking up, I am grateful. Okay. See, why is water and how much good for you to drink at first getting out of bed?
Why is water so good for you to drink when you first wake up?
I figure that's what it was saying. Thank you. So Ruth, why is water good before? Well, first off, let's say somebody wears supplemental oxygen, okay, especially at night, or they have a BiPAP or a CPAP, a PAP device, you know, a non-invasive ventilator, and you wake up, your mouth could be pretty dry. Wintertime, you know, wintertime, lack of humidity. Sometimes in some states, you barely have any humidity during the winter times, usually. Okay, depending on which states. Some states are very humid, while some are very dry. You know, so in winter we lack a lot of humidity. So so let's say you woke up and your mouth felt like cotton mouth, felt like it was sticking to each other. You know, and it feels like your mouth is sticking to each other. Drinking water. You know, drinking water can help loosen up congestion, especially in any thick stuff, you know, that's down deep. And especially if you're wearing supplemental oxygen, it can dry you out. You know, we get a lot of nosebleed incidences where somebody wears a lot of supplemental oxygen, but they don't have a bubbler to humidify that air, so it just constantly dries out the superior, middle, and inferior concha, or what we call the turbinates in your nose. You have the superior, the top, the middle, and the bottom. Very vascular, but they're supposed to be producing humidity, you know, or secretions, so it can be like a Passover humidifier. If somebody wears a BiPAP, CPAP, and they didn't have a Passover humidifier that's connected to their PAP device, that means when they wake up, their mouth is completely dry. You know, so drinking water is always a good thing. Now, how much water? I always start with 8 ounces and work my way through. If 8 ounces worked and I'm still not feeling thirsty, you know, when somebody feels the thirsty, they're like, you're too late on dehydration, meaning you were dehydrated a little while ago. When the person starts feeling thirsty, you're actually more dehydrated than you think. You know, you always want to drink plenty of water, but you know, just water in general. I mean, I hate to go with medication first round. I like to see what I can do with something like holistic type of things first. You know, I like to try water first. I like to try eat an apple first. I like to try do this first. But of course, I'm still going to take my recommended medications. So, why is water and okay? By the way, if you have any other questions, please write them up. Let's see, 7 months of laryngitis after a hospitalization for a COPD exacerbation. Is it common or not for COPD patients to have voice issues? Absolutely, but with laryngitis, especially your larynx are kind of, you're very welcome, Ruth. Your larynx is kind of solidifying a little bit. Your voice can change quite a bit. You can do vocalizations with certain vowels like guh, guh. Did you know that? It sounds silly, but in speech pathology, when they have somebody who's on a trach or people that have swallowing difficulty, by pronunciating certain vowels will help the, if I had an anatomy chart, I could show you, but on the base of your tongue, let's say this is your tongue, on the base of the tongue, okay, you have the epiglottis, that part that bends up right here is called the vallecula. Okay, so on the base of your tongue, you have the vallecula. Well, your windpipe is just right underneath of that. So when you swallow, that's supposed to sit, you know, shut, so no water or anything you're eating goes into your windpipe. Okay, there are times where we do, like, you know, where the epiglottis will come down partially, but not all the way, allowing leakage, sometimes with silent aspiration or just aspiration in itself. So we do different types of therapies to help with that too. That's what HRN does. So we do, like, when people have swallowing difficulties where they're aspirating, we will work on the muscle groups that's specifically used to keep the epiglottis down, so we'll strengthen those up by doing things like vocalization and different things like that. Yeah, HRN is a home rehab network. So it's you go through a lot. If we see the problem, you know, we'll work on that problem. If it's a dietary issue, work on dietary. If it's a strength issue, then we'll work with physical therapy. If it's a lung issue, then we would do, you know, pulmonary care. So you're not seeing just one clinician. There's going to be a lot of involvement with others. Okay. But I hope that answers the question. I'm not trying to be ambiguous, but I'm trying to give the best answer with that. But 7 months of laryngitis after hospitalization, is it common for, or not, for COPD patients to have voice issues? Yes, it is, absolutely. I don't have respiratory problems. Can I join anyway? So you need a legitimate, I love the question. I don't have respiratory problems. Can I join anyway? So unfortunately, we can't allow you to come in to the program unless you have a diagnosis of, like I'm an advanced lung and heart disease person, So we can't do anything that, unless you have a diagnosis. Now, let's say you want to join in the program, but you don't have a diagnosis, you would have to pay everything out of pocket, But so yes, you could join, but you want to join when you actually have a diagnosis. And if your doctor recommends you and then refers you into the program, and then, your insurance usually covers it. But if you're trying to get into the program, you can do that. But I usually, we're medical people. We go to school for years and years and years and years and years and then we have to take all these tests every so often, and especially after graduation. So it's, you're not looking for a personal trainer, you're looking for a clinician. There has to be a reason why, I would think. I don't have respiratory problems. Are you just looking for the exercises? Why don't you join My New Lungs? My New Lungs, just pay whatever it is to go into My New Lungs. It gives you a free trial. Why don't you try out some of the pulmonary rehab, see if you like it with that, And it's mynewlungs.com, by the way. How can I breathe better? I am so short-winded. That's a common question I get so often. How can you breathe better? You need to join into a pulmonary rehab program. I'm not trying to sell this program. I want you to understand that you got to work out with the proper people, not like a personal trainer. You want to go to a clinician that specializes in what the problem is. So if you have problems with breathing, then you'll go to pulmonary rehab. If you have a problem with your heart, then you go to cardiac rehab. Fortunately, we do cardiopulmonary rehabilitation, which we work out heart and lungs out in the exercise programs. Okay? And what does it mean by rehabilitation? That means getting you to be rehabilitated to fix all these little problems where you can't walk far, can't breathe well, very short of breath all the time. What is out of breath caused by? Everyone should know out of breath is not caused by oxygen. It's caused by CO2. I'm going to read Doris's. My oxygen in the last week went down sometimes to 71. I was in therapy yesterday and they ran a lot of tests. I need to know how to get my oxygen up and stay up without having to do oxygen during the day. Very good, Lori. It is CO2 that causes the out of breath. Now, Doris Greenwood, she stated, my oxygen in the last week has went down sometimes to 71. I was in the ER yesterday and they ran a lot of tests. I need to know how to get my oxygen up and stay up without having to do oxygen during the day. So first off, we look at volume. So let's say, Doris, you used an incentive spirometer and your volume isn't very high on your lungs, meaning you're not breathing in like a human being should. You're probably breathing in like a volume for a chipmunk maybe, like a very shallow breath. Well, if you're not pulling in enough oxygen, your oxygen level is going to drop and you might need supplemental oxygen. And if your lungs don't open up like this, they open up top first, middle second, bottom last. If somebody's breathing shallow, then that's all the air contribution they're doing for that huge entire human body. So they might not be pulling in enough. If you breathe in shallow, just notice it. Do you breathe shallow? How do you know you're breathing shallow? What's the easy way to know that you're breathing shallow? You're not seeing any chest rise. You're breathing like this, where you don't notice any chest rise, no shoulder rises. You don't want to breathe like this to be obvious that you're breathing, but you want to breathe in. I usually show my patients to try to breathe in at least halfway. So instead of a full breath, like 100%, that's too excessive. That's too much. No one has to breathe that deep. But if you do, very good, Ruth, no chest rise. If you're not seeing a chest rise, at least some chest rise, then you're probably breathing very shallow. If you're not pulling enough oxygen in, isn't your oxygen levels going to be low during exercise? Of course. It might be okay during sitting still, but as soon as you stand up and walk, doesn't your oxygen drop? Of course, because you're only pulling in a little bit of oxygen that it's used for resting, not for exercises. Why would you use the same volume used for rest as you exercise? Volume, lung volumes. Like if I'm sitting down resting, I'm not going to be breathing super deep. But let's say I use that same shallow breathing for my exercise. My body during my exercise might need like 1 or 2 gallons of air, but I'm only providing it a teaspoon of air because I'm breathing so shallow. Will it work? Of course not. Your CO2 levels will go all the way up, and your oxygen is going to drop all the way down to 71 sometimes. You know, and by the way, 70s is not a good thing. If it's a legitimate 70%, like around the 70s, high 70s to low 70s, 70 is the knockout point. So what I mean by that, when anybody's oxygen goes down into the 70s, they're about to pass out. That's how bad it gets. So if it goes down to 70s, could you feel out of breath at 70%? You couldn't feel out of breath because remember what I said, oxygen doesn't cause you out of breath, it's the CO2. All right, that's why you see a lot of people, you're very welcome guys, you see a lot of people when they work out, they're like, I'm out of breath, my oxygen looks good. Well, of course it does. Being out of breath has nothing to do with oxygen. You know, you see a lot of comments like that, where somebody works out, their oxygen looks good, but they're out of breath. If what people thought was true, it was like, you know, if what people thought was true, low oxygen would cause out of breath, then people with carbon monoxide would be out of breath when that's not true. People that, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, oxygen doesn't cause out of breath, it's the CO2, it's a ventilation problem. You know, then you get some people asking, well, then why am I out of breath at, you know, when my oxygen drops down to 70? Because you're breathing like a freaking chipmunk. You're using lungs this size when your lungs are this size. You're using a volume for a, you're not pulling in enough volume into those lungs. You're breathing so shallow that you're using lungs that keep a squirrel alive, and those are the lungs for the size of a squirrel, in a sense. You know, they're a different shape, but this is actually a squishy, stress-relieving tool. So if you're not pulling enough oxygen in, of course your oxygen is going to drop. So somebody asked me, this happens a lot, where somebody asks me, you know, why do I get out of breath when my oxygen is down to 70s or down to 80s? And I said, look how you're breathing. If you're not pulling enough oxygen in, your oxygen is going to be low. And because you breathe in shallow, you can only exhale shallow. You can only exhale a little bit. Look, what I'm trying to say is, if you breathe in, you can't exhale more than that, because that's, you only pulled in, you know, let's say you pulled in 500 milliliters. That means 500 milliliters of CO2 at around 4 to 6% will actually escape from the body. If you breathe in deeper, more CO2 comes out. If you breathe in deeper, more oxygen comes in. You're the one breathing shallow. So the person, why the person gets out of breath at 70% when it's not the oxygen that causes the out of breath, it's the CO2. That means it's a ventilation problem. It's not an oxygenation problem, it's a ventilation problem. People get short of breath because you're not exhaling enough CO2. Your oxygen is low because you breathe in shallow. That's it. It's not rocket science, it's pretty easy. You know, your body's requiring a lot of oxygen during exercise, you're only providing it a little bit of oxygen. Of course, the oxygen level is going to be down. How do you know your CO2 level is high? Look at your heart rate. I bet you your heart rate's up. You see, I joined HRN in November 2020. My incentive barometer was 900. It took a little while ago. It's now 3,600. Thank you. You're very welcome, Marty. Very, very welcome. You know, that's what we want. People, when you get into this program, there's nothing wrong with any other program out there in the world, but we do have the highest success rate amongst any rehab program in the world. Okay? At least we know it, at least in the United States. There is no one that can compete with us, because from any program out there, there is no program out there, I promise you, please do your research. There is no program out there that can beat a 98%. There is no program out there. They're 11% successful according to the American Lung Association. And we didn't do that, they did that. They studied every single one and they saw HRN is the highest one. You know, everybody else is around 11% successful. 11! Not even 50%, 11% successful. That's ridiculous. You see, all right, how much of 1.5 hour classes are devoted to rehab exercises? So that's a good question. So on rehab exercises, when anybody is new, we like to educate them as much as possible before starting the exercises. The reason behind that is that, you know, the person might get out of breath, and plus the clinician probably doesn't know you if you're brand new. You know, knows your diagnosis, read your medical charts and everything like that, sure, but doesn't know that, hey, you have 18 stairs going up to your house, or you have another problem that isn't covered under there, you have family that smokes around you, or, you know, anything and everything. Like anybody brand new, we usually don't like to work them out for the first week, ever. Okay? We'll do a little bit of exercise, but not a lot of exercises, because we're trying to see, you know, what gets you out of breath, what types of problems do you have, and kind of getting to know you personally. You know, studying you. That's what we like to do, is study you first. On the second week, it's mandatory. On the second week, you have to work out. So workout times, if you're going to start into the HRN program, you usually will get about, after the first 2 weeks, you will probably only get about like 20 minutes of education following that afterwards. And while the rest of the time, from an hour and a half, the rest of the time will just be on exercises. You'll do respiratory muscle training, hyperinflation therapy, bronchial hygiene, all sorts of stuff. You know, learning how to walk and breathe. Like this Wednesday, I'm going to have my class do, and these are people that just started with me. So they didn't just start it, probably been in for about 2 weeks now, I would say. But, you know, when they first started, a lot of them weren't able to do a lot. And now they're up to about 25 minutes on a bike. And a lot of them completed a 6-minute walk test just amazingly. Just on the 6-minute walk test was, you know, some people did a good job, some people need a lot of help, right? They still needed some help. So now that I know that from the first 6-minute walk test, now I know what to strengthen up on some people. Some people were out of breath because they're out of shape. I found some people were out of breath, and some people were not out of breath. Well, I found somebody, they're malnourished, and I found somebody else has low lung volumes. Now I know that, and now I can be strategic with that patient. So on Wednesday, I'm going to have people bike for 15 minutes only. But after they finish the 15 minutes on the bike, I'm going to tell them to take a walk. I'm going to tell them to take a 30-pace walk. I want to see them hyperoxygenating before they start. I want to see them walking and breathing at the same time. And when they come back, I want to take a look at their blood pressures, and I want to take a look at their oxygen and see, and subjectively, how they feel. You know, I want to see where the problem is. So will these exercises help me? So go to my newlines.com. What? Oh, newlungs.com. So you join into the HRN. It's literally written everywhere. HRN, just go to homerehabnetwork.com or go to hrn.health. But if you want to try the program, remember, there's 2 versions of our program. We have the My New Lungs, okay, which is an online pre-recorded self-paced program. And then we have the HRN, which is a telemedicine, where we use your smart device's camera, and you see us and we see you, you hear us and we hear you in real time, no pre-recorded anything. So do you ever have like a telemedicine conference with your doctor, where they put you on Zoom or something, or FaceTime you? That's what it is. So it's rehab. We can see you, you can see us, we do therapy together until you're out. That's it. Okay. So I would recommend going into the rehab program, the HRN program. Look, I would recommend anybody else who can do a really, really good job, but I bring my own mother into this program. Okay. Literally, she comes in here physically because I didn't want her anywhere else. I know what we can do. We have Johns Hopkins, we have Sinai, we have Northwest, we have Carroll Hospital, all these nice hospitals, really prestigious hospitals are all local. I didn't want my mother going anywhere else besides here. And why would I want that? People in my class know that, because she's in class sitting right next to me. Today she had, not today, but as of today, I mean, when my mother first started, she had a heart attack and her lungs collapsed. So I didn't want anybody else messing with her. I wanted to be the one, because I know what I can do. You know, that's why I tell my patients, I know what I can do. okay? So she was with a walker. She had a lot of problems, atrial fib, all the other stuff, right? But ever since she's been in the program for 2 weeks, her doctor said, take the walker away, take the oxygen away. She doesn't need it anymore. She's off oxygen now. She doesn't need her rollator anymore. She doesn't need it. Her balance is better, you know, and her lungs, by her doctor stating that, her doctor specifically stated that, her cardiac surgeon said that your lungs are coming back. I can hear them because they were collapsed before and now they're not. Okay, so they're filling back up again. That's what you should be expecting, a change. If I have my mother go somewhere else, then I'm going to think they're going to do like any other respiratory therapist does, is they jump into the room and they say, here, take this, I'll see you in about 30 minutes, bye. I don't ever want somebody to go through that type of experience. I'm talking about other facilities. There are some really bad facilities you go into that are supposed to be pulmonary rehab, and you go in feeling the same way as you go out. The HRN program is the highest, whether you like it or not. And there is no program in the United States that can beat HRNs. That is already been proven. It is a fact. Let's see, I have 33 steps up to my house and I have COPD, and I get very anxious about leaving my house because I have to walk back up. No problem, no problem. And Doris also, yes, these exercises, of course, would help you, but you'd have to go into the rehab program to get them, you know, because we want to always be, what, strategic. You know, we want to look at you and study you and seeing what gets you out of breath, what types of problems are you having, not just your diagnosis. You know, we will help you out, but we got to know where's your problems, you know. It's easy, you know, if somebody says, well, I get short of breath, and you have another person, I get short of breath. And then you find that one person, when you study them, person got out of breath because they ate too many carbohydrates, and carbohydrates turns into carbohydrates, carbon, right? So when you digest it, turns into carbon, you increase your CO2, you're feeling a little bit out of it, but you're so out of breath because you just ate a ton of carbohydrates. Then you have somebody who's just out of shape because they're out of breath because they're out of shape. Their muscles are just weak. Then you have somebody who has atrial fibrillation, and they get out of breath because they atrial fib. And that's part of one of the symptoms of atrial fibrillation is being short of breath. Nothing to do with lungs, you know? So that's, you have people that say, I get out of breath. So does the rest of the world. But I would like to know what's getting you out of breath. Is it because you're out of shape? Is it, I don't know until we see it, right? I mean, some people don't even know that that's their problem. Their muscles are just very weak. You know, you're having these large leg muscles that's supposed to keep you standing, and let's say they're very weak, they might take 3-4 times more energy to keep, you know, from just standing. It might consume a lot more oxygen than a stronger muscle, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's see. What is the future progress for COPD patients? I don't know who wrote this question, future progress for COPD patients. Look, in HRN, we have studied papers that were done by other organizations that study this program. The future progress of COPD patients, we're fixing them. There's not sure what else I can say about that. I'm a little confused by the question. See, do O2 concentrators work? And so first off, yes, of course they work. They're oxygen concentrators. So they concentrate the oxygen in it, and basically it goes, the oxygen gets, and don't rip them open, but inside of a concentrator there's a certain gold, I want to say it's a coil system, but so as air transports past there, it will pull the nitrogen out and store it and take some of the other stuff out, and now you have just a concentrate. It'll leave the oxygen alone, meaning as the oxygen comes in at 21%, it leaves at around 93% FiO2, the purity. So it concentrates it. Okay, it's never 100%. It's like 93, 98, you know, 93, 94, 95% oxygen, the purity coming out of a concentrator. Here, let me bring a concentrator up. Here, give me one quick second, guys. Stick with me. Hold on. Don't leave just yet. Hold on. Okay, so This one right here, this big one right here, these are actually fairly heavy. This one is a higher flow. This is a 10-liter concentrator. We usually use for a 10-liter concentrator hooking somebody up on that has a tracheostomy, even on a ventilator, on some certain ventilators. But usually on some certain ventilators, they require a 50 psi source, so wall oxygen coming out, or just an E cylinder, or even a G or an H tank. So oxygen concentrators is one thing we always want to make sure we understand on oxygen concentrators. So let me bring this up here because this is important. Okay. So on an oxygen concentrator, this is the back of the oxygen concentrator. The back of the oxygen concentrator, you have a filter. This filter has to be cleaned once a week. I'm not kidding. Once a week. There's a problem with this too, though. Not with the concentrator. This concentrator is perfect. But there's a problem. In facilities, a lot of times they'll have these concentrators, because they're so heavy, they'll have them propping open a door, or they're propping some curtains that are like bed curtains. They're propping them so they don't close back up or something, you know, the curtains. So the spacing from the back of the filter, the spacing from any surface, you have to be at least 7 inches. It's actually 6 3/4, but it's just play it safe. Something has to be at least 7 inches away from this, because if I put my hand and cover this, it will overwork the motor and overheat the motor and then catch a fire. You know, this will catch fire. So if I put my hand over this, or I'm not cleaning that filter, it might clog up, causing the coiling system not bringing any air on intake, and just overheat the motor and then, yeah, catch on fire. That happened quite a bit, quite often, actually, in some facilities. Like per year, I'd be guessing, but I think it was the last time I saw, because I kind of forgot it was a long time ago when I saw that stat, but I believe it was like 1,500 cases per year where concentrators burn up because people are propping them. These are safe, but if you throw it into water, if you put any electrical thing into water, you're going to get shocked. You know, everything has some consequences if they're misused. Everything. Lights to anything. Concentrators, you have to have, you know, if you're going to have this near a wall, you just want to make sure that it's away from the wall by 6 to 7, about 7 inches, or else it will overheat. When you wash these filters now, you wash them with warm, soapy water, and then you let it air dry. It's always best to have 2 filters. One you cleaned, and then you have one that's in there, and you already have one clean. You take this out, replace it with a new one, with one, and then you wash this, let it air dry, and by the week's end, that one that you just washed will be dry already, and you can just switch them out. Just easy without having to, have things being hectic. Oxygen, quick point on oxygen safety. Does anybody know how far you can stay away from fire when you're on supplemental oxygen? So you're not supposed to use any petroleum-based products. No Vaseline, nothing with petroleum in it. Nothing like that. You can't put it on your nose or anything when you're wearing supplemental oxygen, because it's combustible. Petroleum is, So oxygen concentrator. Do you know how far you can stay away from fire? Does anybody know? 6 feet. 6 feet. Okay. Stoves, electric stoves, are still not considered safe. Okay. The stoves, like if you're going to cook and you're wearing supplemental oxygen and you have an electric stove, it's not safe. You have a fire stove, like you have a regular gas stove, not safe. You have the one that has the porcelain top or the glass top that you can easily wipe off, still considered not safe because it can cause friction. Anything that can cause friction in any pure oxygen source will ignite it. The only thing that we saw that was safe according to studies, I'm going off of studies, this is not my opinion, this is studies. According to studies, the only safe thing that you can do is have things pre-made or microwave. Microwave is still considered safe to use when you're wearing supplemental oxygen. Let's see, I must have missed the smoke and cessation you talked about. Is it on Facebook? Yes, it's on Facebook. Just on one of the comments I saw I'm not sure who you are. It just says Facebook user, says that somebody doesn't agree. You don't have to agree with me. I'm going off of procedures that's based off of the required medical practices. So if somebody doesn't agree, that's tough. I didn't make that up. These are proven things we use here to help somebody wean off. But just in case that comment, that was just somebody that didn't know. You know, there's a comment on there is what I'm trying to say, and it says, I don't agree to your conclusion on smoking cessation. I quit cold turkey. Some people can't. That's why there's a variety of techniques. The technique I went over was something that's commonly used, especially by me, and it works wonders. Okay, if I can take it from me, if I can rehabilitate people that smoke all the time and now they're not smoking, obviously I'm doing something right. I'm not going to change that, right? Concentrators also, the purity that comes out. The purity that comes out is facts and science. I love it. Absolutely. We always go facts and science. I'm a big geek when it comes to germs and microbes and things like that, and anatomy and physiology. I love physics too, by the way. I love it. Astronomy. I love astronomy. Oh my goodness, I love astronomy. But anyways, let's go back to this because I can talk all about that stuff all the time. So with a concentrator, the purity that usually comes out is around 93% pure. The 100% pure only comes out of liquids, liquid oxygen. That's about negative 181 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, that's negative 181 degrees Fahrenheit to 100, or if you want to look at it as Celsius, it's negative 118 degrees Celsius is liquid oxygen, meaning it's very, 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 very cold. I mean, it's almost close to absolute zero, which is 0 degrees Kelvin. Whew, nothing can reach 0 degrees Kelvin because nothing can stay alive enough to do it. You know, no matter, no nothing. Anyways, so concentrator produces about 93%. You don't need 100% all the time. 93% would be just fine. That's coming out, let's say. But on oxygen, so this is what we call a compensated Thorpe tube. John, could you zoom in on this real quick, please? Let me put this over here. I know we don't have a lot of time. We only have like 2 minutes, but I want to show this really fast. Can you try to zoom in on that? Just especially like right here. Yeah, just bring it down. Yeah, right there. Bring it up. Yeah, right there. That's perfect. That's good. Yeah, just kind of zoom on that. This tube right here. This is called a compensated Thorpe tube. Okay. Now, there are 2 different types that you might see on a concentrator. One that's just a simple dial that goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 liters per minute. That is a non-compensated regulator. So this is a compensated Thorpe tube. So let's say you turn this on and you went to, you know, your doctor said you're going to be on 4 liters per minute. And let's say you add 50 feet of hosing. The ball in the tube will actually go down. And to compensate, you just increase the flow until it's back up to 4. It's like every 10 feet it goes distance in those oxygen tubings. So if you put like 50 feet of tubing onto a concentrator, the flow will actually decrease. So you have to have it compensated. This is a compensated Thorpe tube. Thorpe, T-H-O-R-P-E, Thorpe. This is a compensated Thorpe tube. So if you put a large line, let's say 50 feet, 100 feet, which would be a lot of pressure, but let's say you hook that in there and it was at 4, 6 liters, let's say, it will actually drop. And then all you have to do to readjust it is increase the flow until it's back up to where you're supposed to be at. And that's why these types of concentrators are really, really good, especially the ones with a compensation on there. So just in case, because if you have the one that's just a dial type, if you have the one that goes to 1, 2, 3, and you have to dial it in, it's not like a Thorpe tube like this, then you put 100 feet of tubing onto it, and let's say it's supposed to be at 2 liters, you might be only getting like 0.5 liters. You know, but there's no way of telling because there's no compensation. There's nothing managing this. A compensated Thorpe tube manages the flow rate. So if you put a lot of tubing on there, the Thorpe tube, the ball in the Thorpe tube will actually start to drop. Okay? All right, guys, I will take any advice I can get. Thank you for all your help. Go, Alex. So, thank you. You see, been a nurse 45 years. Perfect. Love it. I have been using the breather. Is that good? We don't like to use breathers because of the success rate with them. They advertise a lot to be really good, but unfortunately they're not. And from what we've seen, we don't recommend people using them in the program. So we like to use the Delta V just so we can manage the flow rate. Breathers, there's no way to managing flow rate, and that's one of the requirements, is you want to manage flow rate. You know, if you look at the AACVPR, I'll just mention this. I know we're at the end right now. If you look at the AACVPR, that's the American Association of Cardiovascular Pulmonary Rehabilitation, that's the AACVPR. Take a look at intercostal muscle training. They'll show, because these are outdated sources, that respiratory muscle training is not beneficial. Like, no, I shouldn't say not beneficial, that there's nothing proven, there's no peer review. That's true because you have PN Medical that started up with the breather, and they had the other one that the smaller version was like a small blue with 2 dials on the top and bottom, the older version back in the 80s. So they were like the first ones that came out with respiratory muscle trainer, but there was no way to manage flow rate. So the peer review and the outcomes coming from it were always horrible. The Delta V came out like a couple years ago. You know, the Delta V, you attach it to an incentive spirometer to manage the flow rate. Now they're doing a study to prove to the AACVPR that intercostal diaphragmatic muscle strengthening devices, the respiratory muscle strengthening like the Delta V, is now proven to be 100%, like perfect. Because now we can manage and measure things. We can understand the flow rate and things like that. Hey, Stephen, you still driving that big rig? For those that don't know, I remember all my patients. Oh yeah, I remember. I don't not go with names though, but faces. Oh my goodness, I'm great with faces. Let's see, I'll take any advice, no problem. Lenny, very welcome, no problem. And anyways, guys, that's it, all right? Please write up any more questions and things like that for next time, but I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye. Alex Grichuhin signing off. You still writing? Be safe out there, Stephen. A lot of nuts out there. I think you already know.